All right.
All right, guys. I'm excited to have Desmond here. That until a month ago, I had no idea who he was. I gotta be honest with you. And then my assistant, she connected me with him. I did a little bit of research, and not just what he's doing currently, but his whole life trajectory, his hero's journey, was something that I really wanted to hear from him in the first person. So I'm excited to have Desmond Meade here in the Heroes podcast. It's a pleasure. Thank you for giving me your time and coming from all the way from Orlando, guys. This guy came all the way from Orlando just to share his story. So I'm really grateful that you're here.
Just to hang out with Mateo here, you know what I'm saying? I'm not even going to look at him. I'm going to look at you, right? Because I know that the message is for you guys that's out here that's watching this and listening to this podcast.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Pleasure being here, Mateo.
So I usually want to know, obviously, like from the beginning. So where are you from? Where did you grow up, Desmond?
Yeah, so I was born in the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix, but I moved to Miami at a very young age. I think I was around like 5 or 6 years old. And I've grown up for most of my life in Dade County, Florida. Spent some time living in Illinois, in the suburbs of Chicago. And then when I was older and at an adult age, I spent some time living in Hawaii because I was in the military.
Oh, wow.
But mainly South Florida is home, and it's Central Florida is my home right now.
How was growing up in the Virgin Islands? How's that environment, that culture?
Well, let me tell you, I actually wrote about it. I have a book out now for a couple of years called "Let My People Vote." And in that book, I wrote about growing up there as a young kid. Of course, like I said, I moved from the Virgin Islands early, but there were some very distinct memories that I had of the island. Very tranquil, peaceful place. But two things, my relationship that I had, or that my family had with some evangelists that were going around and opening up churches in different places. And in this particular story I told in my book about how there was a white family from, I believe, Tennessee, or Georgia actually, who came real close to my family. And the granddaughter, Amy, her and I was inseparable. And the memory I have is when they were leaving the island, and Amy and I did not want to let each other go. We was hugging each other, we was crying, we was screaming at the top of our lungs, and both of our parents was trying to separate us and pull us apart. And when they were successful and they'd take us on their way, we would break loose from our parents, and then we would run back and we'd hug each other, holding on to each other for dear life. Amy was a white girl, I was a black boy, but we didn't see race or anything. All we knew was that there was a connection or a bond that we had that we did not want broken, And so that was a very distinct experience I had. And, of course, the other one that stood out more to me was attending a funeral. And so I've always been fascinated with death and what it really means. And so taking those two things, I think they have played a role in shaping who I am today.
So then from the Virgin Islands, you moved to Florida, and then you said Illinois, Hawaii. Like, why were you going all over the place? What was the...
Well, we grew up, like I said, I grew up most of my years in South Florida. But eventually, my mom and dad, they split up. My dad moved to Illinois. He worked for a place called Fermilab, which does a lot of exploration of the atom, I believe. So it's a place that it have what they call a centrifugal ring, and they split the atom up just to study the atom. And so he was a cryogenic technician up there, and so I used to spend some time with him, especially when it didn't get too cold, in the Chicago area.
Was it like a cultural shock going from like the South to like all the way up to the North? Was it a different culture?
Yeah, it was. But like, even though it was different, there was so many similarities. I actually wrote about that in the book too as well, right? Because in South Florida, I attended an all-black school. Basically, maybe there were 5 to 10 people who were not black. And then when I moved up north, right, the school I attended was an all-white school, to where it was maybe 5 to 10 people who were African American, and so, it was just a whole difference. You seen with just the interaction with students. But what I learned is that there was still the similarities, where there's the same fears, the same cliques, the same challenges. Even though the dynamics, the racial dynamics were different, there were just more things that were similar than were different.
Let me ask you, man, because I'm an immigrant. I'm not from here. I migrated from Italy. Like, did you feel like welcome from the beginning? Did you feel some friction, or like blending into America? How was your experience with that?
I always, for me, I think, back then, I don't think it was as difficult as it is now. I think back then, you've always had, especially in South Florida, it's always been like the gateway to so many different cultures, and I think the variety of the cultures is what creates the spice in Miami, right? And so there was not too much of a culture shock for me. Like I said, I came over at a young age, but one of the things is that folks just group all the islands together in one. The accents. Everybody thinks that because you have an accent, you're from Jamaica, but you're not necessarily from Jamaica. It could be from the Bahamas or from the Virgin Islands, or so many of the different islands that's out there in the Caribbean. But other than that, I think that South Florida created back then an atmosphere that really welcomed immigrants to this country.
Wow. So, okay, Virgin Islands, South Florida, Illinois, then you mentioned Hawaii. How long was your experience in Hawaii? Was it like a brief...
Hawaii was a brief experience. That's military. I served a few years over there back in the late 80s. But yeah, that was a very brief point. Okay,
man. So like your childhood, obviously, like you moved here early. Like, were you going to school? How was your upbringing? Like, obviously, you said your parents separated, and you were seeing your father quite often. How was your childhood, your first years?
I mean, it was great. I mean, I come from a family who have strong faith, right? My dad, he was a preacher, and I mean, everyone in my family were believers, and they identified primarily as Christians. And so there was always a Christian or Christianity type foundation in our household, and so it was never a want for that, it was always there. And as having a dad that's a preacher, you're definitely going to be in, like, I'm a preacher's kid, you're definitely going to be in multiple services. So it wasn't just a one-day thing. In our community, sometimes we're in the church 3-4 times a week, and so we were very deep. My dad was a teacher, not a school teacher, but he was he likes to teach from the Bible. And so there was a lot of orientation around really learning scriptures and, doing different exercises to gain familiarity with the Bible. So that was some fun times. We used to have some great times.
So it sounds like you grew up with a strong foundation. Like...
Yeah, I would say that. I would say we had a very solid foundation. Much better than, some that I've heard of come across. But I definitely, there's very minimal complaints about my foundation.
So what happens next? Like you go to high school, college?
Well, the high school, the high school is always a struggle, because what do you want to be, Desmond? You want to be a jock, or do you want to be a nerd, And, those are the challenges that a typical, high school student faces, What crowd you want to be in, and whether or not you're accepted, and, you're a cool kid or you're not a cool kid. And so there was always a struggle there. For me, it was because, I was a smart person, and my mother really she stressed education with me from a very young age. And so even as a child in elementary, I had a strong thirst for reading all kinds of books, and so reading was like I couldn't go anywhere without a book in my hand, right? And so I was always advanced on that aspect. But I also was athletic, and I love sports, especially football, American football. Um, and so, you still want to hang out with the athletes or the jocks. They're the cool kids. They're the ones that everybody, wanted to be around. And so, it was like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be as smart. Maybe I should spend more time with athletics and things of that nature. But, yeah, I still did well. I could have done better, but I did well enough to at least satisfy my parents, and be able to leverage my early learnings into a successful college career.
Okay, so good student. You enjoyed learning, and you were advanced compared to the other ones. How does your life move forward from then?
Well, one of the things, was being able to join the military, serve the country, and I went into a field called aviation. So I was a medium helicopter repairman. I worked on the you ever seen the helicopters, the real long ones that have two rotor blades spinning at the same time? They call them Chinooks, CH-47s. And so I crewed on that, was a mechanic on that. And that was a very, I would say, an exciting time. Especially one of the main reasons was because I remember I was on a flight line where the helicopters were parked, and I was doing some type of repair to where it required me to get underneath the helicopters, the underbelly of it. And I remember I kept seeing these metal patches. I'm looking up and I'm like, what are these patches for? And then I spoke to one of the pilots, and the pilot explained to me that those were patches to cover up the bullet holes, because those helicopters that I was working on was the same helicopters that flew a lot of missions during the Vietnam War. And it really had me thinking about how, because most of the material like that covers the helicopter is either aluminum or what they call honeycomb, right? And so it's not heavy, it's not thick, it's not bulletproof, right? And so they're like a flying cardboard box in a sense, right? Wow. And so to think that there were people that were flying these helicopters to go and rescue people, soldiers who were wounded or trapped somewhere, that these helicopter pilots would fly into danger, right? To where the enemy was shooting at them from the ground, and they would go and they would get the soldiers, and they would bring them back, and then they'll go again for another round. To think that folks would actually put their lives on the line to rescue someone else, that was very moving for me. And I think it was a pivotal moment in my military career that helped me have a deeper understanding and deeper appreciation for people who served in the military, particularly those on the front line who knowingly and willingly put their lives on the line for the mission or for saving their fellow soldiers.
How old were you when you enrolled?
Oh, I was 18. I went in at a very young age, right out of high school.
What was like the motivation? What made you decide, hey, I wanna go in the military?
Well, to be honest with you, it was watching a Rambo movie, First Blood, right? Yeah. That was, I seen that movie, and John Rambo was a Army Airborne Ranger, Special Forces type of guy, and that's what I wanted to do.
I mean, that doesn't give a good image of the military, though, because the guy comes back from Vietnam. He's psychologically...
Well, it doesn't give a good image, and even to this day, it doesn't give a good image about how this country treats its veterans. That's what, for me, First Blood showed, right? Because remember, this guy was coming back from Vietnam.
All his friends
and people
died.
were like, oh, yeah, you're nothing but a baby killer or whatever, you know. And so a lot of people who fought in Vietnam faced a lot of rebuke from people in the States, you know. Then you had, of course, African-American soldiers who came back from Vietnam, right, but they still was discriminated against, right, by the country that they were supposedly fighting for. Right, and then today you have people that are coming back from conflict, but we don't have the support services to actually treat the PTSD. John Rambo didn't have anybody treating his PTSD, and he was left to fend for himself, right? And then eventually he had to defend himself against the same people who he put his life on the line to preserve their liberty, right? And so, you know, it's ironic that you would fight for someone's liberty just so they can deny your own liberty, right? And it's crazy, but that's how it was. And so, yeah, he was. When I seen that movie, I wanted to be like him. I wanted to serve the country. I wanted to be able to do
amazing.
extraordinary things. I wanted to be a hero.
So would you say was it a positive experience overall? Like camaraderie, like being around guys with the same age as you, having the same ideals and dreams?
Well, here's the thing. I don't know if I would say the same ideals and dreams. I don't necessarily say it's guys like me, because one I learned in the military is that, man, that's where you get, I think that was my first experience of being around people from, I use this term a lot now, people from all walks of life and all political persuasions. I think that was probably my first experience. I mean, there were people from everywhere, everywhere in the country, different ideologies, but we were through training and through proximity, you know. And a lot of times, yeah, we may not have liked each other, but we had some common values or common goals that we shared that allowed us to function as a unit, especially realizing that our lives depended on us being able to function as a unit. And so military was one experience where people had to learn to put aside their differences in order to accomplish a goal that was much greater than our individual desires, you know. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, is a lot for 18-year-old young man. So I'm sure it was an experience. That
it was definitely a learning experience. Yeah, we know. I would say now at 18, you know, I didn't realize what I was being taught at the time I was being taught it. You know, and you know, like even as kids growing up, and our parents is trying to teach us things, we don't understand it. So our parents don't understand. That's what we'll say, and you know, and we don't even realize it until we become parents ourselves, and they're like, "Oh, that's what mom was talking about. Oh, that's what dad." Now, then you find yourself, wait a minute, I'm acting just like him now, right?
And the same person. So, how many years was this experience in the military?
It was close to 5.
Wow.
Close to 5 years. Yeah. It was.
What happens?
In the military, I end up getting in trouble a little bit in the military, and I think the last 3. Well, actually, no. Yeah, the last 3. I did 5 years of active service, and then 3 years. I did of confinement.
Okay.
So 5 years, active service, doing everything the right way, whatever. Made some mistakes at the very end due to substance abuse, drug abuse. And I ended up getting court-martialed and and then I had to spend 3 years incarcerated because of that.
What was it? The environment that pushed you like
No, it was me.
uncomfortable
It was me.
or
It
something?
was. I've learned that at the end of the day, the buck starts and stops with me, and it was me. Wanting to experiment with drugs and fascinated with drugs, thinking it was something cool to do, and not realizing the destructive nature of addiction. And yeah, I got caught up into that, and the next thing I'm doing 3 years of confinement.
How was that experience, if you want to share?
I mean, that experience was, it's funny you ask that, because I think that what I can now say is that I guess I had the ability to take any experience that I have or I'm in and learn from it. And I think that, thinking about that now, is that I think that's a good thing. That's a good trait to have, to be able, no matter how bad your experience might be, there's something that you can learn from it, that you can pull from it, that can turn a negative situation into a positive situation, right? And so, the time that I was confined, really, for me, drove home something my mother told me many years ago, that like, man can take away a lot of things from you, but one thing that man cannot take away from you is your education, your knowledge, right, your wisdom. And so really was able to hone in on that, and find ways to continue just educating myself and taking my experience there, and really compartmentalizing it, knowing that one day it might become of use, and it has. It really has. To be able to, I think everything negative that I've gone through in life allows me an opportunity to at least walk a few steps in someone else's shoes, right? Because if you haven't gone through anything, then how could you really effectively talk to someone that is going through something, right? And talk to them from a position of experience, right? Someone who's gone through something is more equipped to advise someone, on how to get through whatever it is that thing is, right? If you've never been to Miami, never ever been to Miami, how are you giving people advice on how to travel around Miami? You've got to say, hey, I visit Miami every summer, or every, twice a year. I'm hanging out on South Beach or whatever, I know South Beach. And so, yeah, you should go to that club. You should go to that restaurant, and you can give those type of advices because you've had that experience. But if you've never been to Miami, then, what you're telling someone is not as substantive, right? Because there isn't that real life experience that's attached to your advice. And so, whatever negative stuff that I've been through, what I have found is that they have could serve a useful purpose in my life, and it does today.
So you kept yourself busy, essentially, like you educated yourself, you were studying, I assume you kept a structure just to go through that experience.
Yeah, one day at a time.
Wow. Have you, first of all, like in your last 3 years in the military and then in this experience incarcerated, did you find any support, or you found yourself by yourself?
I think the main support, for the most part, when people are incarcerated, when they're doing time, their family is doing time with them. I was slightly different because I didn't want my mother to know I was incarcerated, so I kept my distance.
She didn't know.
She had no idea. I kept my distance, and I maybe had 2 friends that knew. One specifically knew because his job was to let me know if something would ever happen to my mother. At least I would have some type of you know, some insight there. And so he was the liaison. But other than that, just me and two friends. And I spent a lot of time really learning more about who I am as a person and my faith,
The podcast is called the Hero's Podcast because I talk about the hero's journey. And the hero's journey, there's always some stages that everybody goes through in order to evolve as a human being. And one of the stages is called the belly of the whale. Essentially, you go into like this darkness, you lose your identity, and you have to reinvent yourself from scratch. Would you say that was your belly of the whale, where you had to from zero going back into like rebuilding yourself?
No, that was prior to the belly of the whale.
Oh,
That was the appetizer. That was just me on the tongue of the whale. I didn't get swallowed yet, right? But I was on the way there. Little did I know that I had a little bit more falling to do. And that came after I came back home.
so you go out of the
I get out of the military. I come back home here in South Florida. I start doing some executive protection work, bodyguarding celebrities here and there.
Okay.
And got right back into using drugs. And at some point, eventually, I was my mother passed away, and once my mother passed away, I lost total control. And I got to a point to where I was homeless, addicted to drugs, and in and out of jails and prisons, and found myself standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I could jump in front of it. That's when I was at the depth of the belly of the beast, right there, and that was August of 2005. And I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, so I must have been really deep into the belly, because I didn't see any way out. I didn't see any use. And what I mean by use, I didn't see how I was useful to society. And I was ready. I was ready to say, my time's up. But, God had other plans.
You didn't have anybody that you could talk to or that had your back somehow?
It was no one to talk to. I mean, I went to the night before I was in front of the railroad tracks. The night before I went to a church. And I went and I asked a lady who was a pastor there to pray for me, because a friend of mine told me if I can get to that church and have this lady pray for me, maybe my life would improve. And so when I went there and I asked the lady to pray for me, she told me I had to make an appointment for the next day. And I was like, oh, Jesus, really? I mean, I spent the last change I had in my pocket just to get to this church to get prayer. And she told me I had to wait another day, make an appointment. And so I remember not making the appointment, but walking out the church saying that even God has turned his back on me. And, of course, the next day was when I was in front of those railroad tracks. So, man, if God didn't want to talk to me, then who else was there to talk to, Who else? And so...
What goes on in your mind at like those moments, man? That's like the ultimate decision, essentially.
Yeah. Like, what is left, And so, there was nothing. I think that was when there's no further falling to do, That's when they say when you hit rock bottom. And the only other direction to go from there is up. And so that started when I crossed the tracks, because the train never came. And so the up part started as soon as I walked across the tracks.
There was the threshold.
Yep.
The train never came. You crossed the railroad, and metaphorically, that was entering into a new phase
realm,
of your life.
a new realm, right? Yes.
Did you feel that that moment was a pivotal moment for your personal journey?
Oh yeah, it was. It was. I mean, as soon as I crossed the tracks, I actually stopped, looked back at the tracks, and I asked myself a transformational question. A simple question, and it was, Desmond, if the train would have came and you would have died, how many people would come to your funeral? Just that simple. How many people would come to your funeral if you died? And the immediate answer in my head was zero. Nobody would come because I'm homeless. I didn't have any identification or anything. And so they probably would have buried me in the pauper's grave, right?
Where were you sleeping? Like,
what you mean? Excuse me. What you mean? Where was I sleeping at?
I mean, you said homeless. Like,
I was homeless. So I mean, wherever. So I didn't have a physical address. So no one could send me mail. And there was no way for me to go pick up mail or anything.
No friends. Like no.
I was pure homeless. And so I would have been buried, more likely in the pauper's grave. And so that initial answer was a sobering answer because, to just think that no one would come to your funeral, that should be enough to jar anyone. But I didn't like it. I didn't like the answer, so I changed the scenario, and I said, okay, Desmond, you get killed by this train. The Miami Herald, which is the biggest paper in South Dade, they run a story on it, and they at the top of the front of the page, top of the fold, big bold headlines: Desmond killed by train, right? And so with that being out there, then I asked, okay, well then how many people will come to your funeral now? Now that it's on the front page of the Miami Herald, how many people would come to your funeral, Desmond? And let me tell you, I thought long and hard, and I only came up with 4 people. Only 4, and maybe out of the 4, maybe 2 would have shed a tear. And it made me ask myself how significant my life has been. And basically, it was like, Desmond, after all these years of living in these different places, traveling the world, having all kinds of friends and relationships, right? You mean to tell me only 4 people would care if you died? Like, and the
Wow.
question that drove it home was, has your life been that insignificant? And I never forget that last question. Like, what have I been doing with all of my life? Like, what have I been doing with my life? Like, you mean, has it been wasted? Like nobody cared over all of the years I've been doing so much. And yeah, that really bothered me. And I took that feeling with me when I walked a couple blocks further from the tracks, and it was a place called Central Intake where it allowed people to request to be placed in drug treatment programs. And so I was able to go there. They were able to place me in the program that very same day, which was a lifesaver.
So all of this happened on the same day?
The same day.
Railroad tracks, you cross it, you start
cross
questioning
it.
all these things, you come to these conclusions, you're like, yo, I'm going to...
Walk 2 blocks and check myself in the drug treatment.
Wow, man.
Yep. It was the railroad tracks was, right within, it was 2 blocks away from the tracks. And so
you go in, you're like, hey,
I need help.
I got to do something about this.
And they said, okay, we'll help you. And they did. And so they put me in the program. It was a 4-month residential in-house program. Very intensive. And so for 4 months, I learned about myself and learned, I had an experience while I was there, just seeing, as a matter of fact, that was the year that Rosa Parks passed away. And Rosa Parks, I don't know if you know about Rosa Parks,
of course.
But civil rights icon, right? She committed one act, right?
Changed the world.
Yep, that changed like the world, right? One act. And so, and you know, when I seen that they had her body lay in state in the rotunda of the Capitol in D.C. And there was so many people that were going to pay their last respects, and I seen a lot of those folks had tears rolling down their faces, and I don't know, when I was looking at it on TV, for some reason I just got captivated, right? And I remember jumping up and screaming at the TV, and I was pointing. I was like, "That's it. That's what I want, right? When I die, I want to have a funeral like that, right? Not one where only 4 people would care, right? Or maybe 2 would have shed a tear." But I wanted people to be sad that I died. And in essence, what I was really saying was I wanted to feel like I was something or someone of significance. I wanted to feel like my life, the time that I spent on this earth, was worth something, and that I was worth something to someone, right?
Wow.
And so,
How old were you?
man, God, that's a good question. That I am not prepared to answer that question, but I was probably in my 30s. Yeah, probably in my 30s, late 30s.
Wow, man. So you saw this on TV and you were like,
I've seen this.
I want to have an
funeral.
impact like she did.
Well, I didn't think about the impact. What I thought about was I wanted the funeral, right? So I didn't get to the impact yet. I just wanted the funeral. And which meant that I was trying to figure out, okay, where do I want to hold? I was planning my own funeral. And I was trying to figure out what place that I want, and no place was big enough except for the Dolphins football stadium, right?
Okay.
At the time, they called it Joe Robbie Stadium. I wanted my funeral held in a football stadium, right? Right? I wanted every seat filled. I wanted everybody to be crying. You know, in essence, that was my inner soul screaming for, I want to feel as if I was worth something, right? And you know, when I finished with the scenario, it kind of reminded me really of, you remember when Kobe Bryant and his daughter died in a helicopter crash, and they did a memorial for them? It was similarly the same, almost like the same thing, with the only exception, it was that their memorial was in a basketball arena. I wanted mine in a football stadium. That was the only difference, but that was the kind of thing that I was envisioning. So now when I get to the scenario of what I want, right, in the packed house, now the question became, well, how do you get, like, what type of person can get that many people to come to their funeral, right? Or their memorial service? And let me tell you, I thought maybe an athlete or maybe a movie star, right? And, you know, I played the scenarios out, and I didn't think I could be either one of those. Because mainly for movie star, because when I think movie star, I think of Denzel. You know, now listen, my wife tells me I'm not a bad looking guy, but I didn't think I was Denzel Washington type of. You know, back then I didn't. And so I got depressed, but because I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not an athlete, I'm not a movie star, so I can't have this. But then we're like, wait a minute, go back to Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks did something that had an impact in people's lives. And so what I thought about was, maybe if I could take all of the pain and the suffering and the low self-esteem that led me to the railroad tracks, right, and package it in such a way that way it can help other people, so they don't have to go to the railroad tracks, and so they don't have to contemplate ending their lives. If I could somehow take all of the bad things that happen in my life and use it to create good moments in other people's lives, right, and they pass it on to others, and so on, pretty soon, you know, I may have enough people around the country or in the world that can say, man, that Desmond Meade did something positive that created a positive experience for me or my family member or my friend. Man, I'm sure going to miss him. Man, the time that he spent on this earth, you know, benefited us, you know. And so that's what I did, man. I was like, wait a minute, that's the key, right? I might not be a movie star, I might not be an athlete, but what I can do is that I can be a regular, everyday person that just takes my negative experiences and use them in such a way to create positive experiences for someone else.
Wow.
Right.
Essentially, like you wanted to use your story.
Yep, and that was the recipe. That's been the recipe from all the way up to right now. All the way up to right now is to take the things that hurt us and turn it into something that can help others. Yeah.
Was it, because obviously, remember, when you make that decision, and also talking about personal experience, you have to be willing to share even your most vulnerable parts to the outside world. Were you ever like scared or uncomfortable about this?
Always. I think we're always scared of being vulnerable, or being looked at as being weak. Mistakes have always been frowned upon, right? Not realizing that the reality is that mistakes are so valuable, right? They're the most, I think, some of the most valuable things that tools that you can actually use to succeed in life are mistakes, right? Because at least you learn what not to do, right? As you're discovering what to do.
So you went through all of this process in your mind. So you decided, I want to use my story to
help other people, to create a better world for other people.
So in practice, what did you do?
Whoa, Jesus. That's a great question, right? So the first thing is, I've been homeless. I was homeless for quite a number of years. So I ended up joining an organization that advocated for safe and affordable housing in Dade County, right? And in joining that, I ended up becoming a part of the Miami-Dade Homeless Trust, right? And where I was part of the process of supporting programs or strategies that drastically reduced the homeless population in Dade County, right? From having thousands of folks living on the streets, I think, to our lowest of having like under 800 people living on the streets. And we were able to do it during a time of recession, and so that was one of the things. And then my engagement with the homeless advocacy organization led me to other smaller groups of advocacy groups that I may have been associated with in some form or another, but it eventually led me to a coalition of state and national organizations, and the coalition was named the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. That coalition, I eventually turned that into an actual entity in Florida in 2011, and that entity was centered around felon disenfranchisement, because I know probably not so in Italy, but in the United States we have this thing to where if a person is found guilty of committing a felony offense, they would actually be stripped of their civil rights for the rest of their lives, which means they can't vote, they can't serve on a jury, they can't run for office, they can't own a firearm, and then there are other thousands of other collateral consequences that impact their ability to get occupational licenses, their ability to buy or even rent a home.
Correct me if I'm wrong, man. Sorry if I interrupt. Like committing a felony.
You want to repeat that question?
Yeah. So committing a felony is a very gray area. Like even the smallest act can be a felony, and then your life it changes forever.
Listen, I remember one time when the Pope, I think it was Jean Paul, I can't remember the number, but this was back in 2008 or 2009. The Pope at the Vatican, because remember the Pope used to release the doves at a certain time at the Vatican.
Yeah.
And a lot of animal rights groups was giving him a hard time for that.
You were saying about the Pope in Rome with the Vatican with the doves and the balloons?
Yeah, so the Pope, at one point, part of a certain ceremony, he used to release white doves into the air, and a lot of animal rights groups started protesting that. And so he shifted from releasing white doves to releasing white balloons, right? And I remember when I seen that, the first thought came to mind was that if he were to do that in Florida, he would get arrested and possibly convicted of a felony offense, because it is a third-degree felony to release balloons like that in the air. And so
that is like a criminal act.
That's a criminal act, and that he would lose his rights for the rest of his life. Because let me tell you, and this is a true story, a guy in Broward County, for Valentine's Day, rather than giving his wife a dozen roses, he had a dozen red balloons and he released them. And when he did, he got arrested.
And that goes on your record.
That will go on your record. But more importantly, if he was convicted of it, I don't know what the outcome of his case was, but if he were to be convicted of that offense, he would have lost his civil rights for the rest of his life. Things like catching a lobster whose tail is too short.
That's a felony.
That's a felony. If you on the beach and you disturb turtle nesting eggs, that's a felony. If you trespass on a construction site, that's a felony. On a pier, that's a felony. If you drive with suspended license, that's a felony.
So essentially, you incur in that, your life is fucked.
It's
No civil rights, no voting rights.
No voting rights, none of that. And then, of course, you're forced to wear the scarlet letter of shame or scarlet word of shame for the rest of your life.
Is it a stigma?
It's definitely a stigma. I mean, if you're considered a felon, I mean, that's not a term of endearment, right?
Would you have issues getting hired for a job as well?
So those are part of the collateral consequences. Employment, housing, education. There are like thousands of those collateral consequences that anybody would face because of a conviction in any of these things. It's gray area.
Let me ask you something, man, because I'm not from America and I see these things very clearly, and sometimes I'm a little bit shocked of how the system works here. Why is it so easy to be arrested, be convicted? Why the system here is so easy to convict someone of a criminal act?
That's a good question. I think that like every year there's something new, another new law that's being added as an infraction, something that is what they call an arrestable offense. And so we just create a lot of laws. And the more laws we create, and of course, the state of our economy, because what we're seeing is that the majority of arrests are happening in communities that are struggling economically, that are not getting the type of support services, not getting the type of educational opportunities, and not getting like the access to upward mobility, whether it's high-paying jobs or things of that nature. And so
it's all connected.
Yeah, they're connected. The increase of criminal offenses that folks could lose their rights over, and the decrease of opportunities. Would create the perfect storm to see an uptick in arrests.
So essentially, you see all of this based on your personal experience.
Yeah.
And you were like, I want to do something about this. This has to change.
Yeah.
So you were still homeless, but what fascinates me is you were living in the streets, but your vision was up here.
Well, yeah, but I mean, eventually, kind of, right? Let me just shift that a little bit. When I was doing what I was doing, I wasn't living in the streets anymore.
Okay.
But the experiences of living in the streets informed me, right? And so once I was able to complete the drug treatment program, right, and I moved into a shelter, eventually I moved into a home the type of group housing that was created for sober living experience. And most folks in the industry call that a three-quarter way house. And so I moved into a setting like that to where I was a manager, and for many years that's what I did. I helped create spaces for people who were battling substance abuse to actually reenter back into their families, reenter back into society, either coming out of incarceration or coming out of a drug treatment facility.
Wow. So, okay, you were a man on a mission. How long did it take before you could see some real tangible changes?
Changes in me or what?
in this process that you were going through, like so external, like you wanted to change how the system worked.
I think the biggest change that we made was in 2018. I led an effort to restore voting rights to over 1.4 million people with a previous felony conviction.
Wow.
We've seen that happen in November of 2018.
Wow.
And so that was one distinct period that said, oh, wow, we made a difference, right? And so since then, it's been every day, it's been a constant grind and to try to fulfill the promises of that movement, what we call Amendment 4. And, you know, there have been victories every day that someone is coming to the organization or approaching me on the street and talking about how they themselves or a family member was able to vote in our or participate in our democracy because of our efforts in 2018. That's huge. That's a victory.
Wow, man. I'm mindful of your time. I know we're already at 1 hour, but I have so many questions. Do you feel now that that vision that you had about the stadium, do you feel you're getting closer to that vision, first of all?
Well that's a good one. I think that I don't know about getting close to that vision because what I learned early on, not too long afterwards, is that I didn't really need the stadium anymore. I didn't need the big funeral. That, you know, what makes my life worthwhile if I could help one person. That's all, one person. And I know I far exceeded that, you know. And so, no, I don't need the funeral, but we're beyond that now. We're because of our efforts, you know, I've been named Central Floridian of the Year, Time Magazine named me one of the 100 most influential people in the world. The MacArthur Foundation recognized me as a genius, so I have the Genius grant. And then the American Friends Service Committee was an organization who nominated my organization for a Nobel Peace Prize. And so the significance there was that we were nominated by the same organization who nominated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Wow.
Right? And so there was a lot of things that just came just from the desire to want to take a mistake or to take a pain and turn it into create a purpose and use it to make a difference in other people's lives, you know.
In one interview that I watched that you had, you said there's something that I was like, I need to speak with this guy. You said that the power of one, because you were talking about like your experience, and you were like, if I can just help one person.
One is the most powerful number, because you don't get to any other number before getting through one, you know. As a matter of fact, I think the basic numeric system is basically 1, 0, and 1, right?
Yeah.
Binary system, right? And so, yeah, that one is very powerful, very powerful.
If you were to say, like, looking back at this journey, what was like a moment that taught you an important lesson, or even just like someone that appeared on your journey and you were like, this person changed the way my trajectory was going, like a helper or a mentor or? No,
man, yeah. So there's so many helpers and mentors that it'd be too much to name. But I think a person that I think had a significant impact was a young lady who thought she'd never be able to vote again. And then by the time she discovered that she would be able to vote, her doctor had given her less than 6 months to live. And her dying wish was to be able to get to vote again. And she didn't get that opportunity because she passed away before that, the election. But to know that someone felt the importance of being a part of something bigger than herself, of being a part of the democracy was that important to her, to where it wasn't, her dying wish was not to meet a celebrity or, to visit an exotic location, but it was just to be able to vote again. That was very impactful for me.
Wow. We're done. We're wrapping up. But whatever you want to say, something that you want to share that you haven't said, and obviously how can people get in touch with you and what you do?
I mean, you talk about the Hero Podcast and the hero journey, right? I think the one thing I tell folks and what I've discovered is that so many times we're looking externally for the hero without even realizing that we're the hero that we've been looking for, yearning for. It's inside of each and every one of us. And we have ability to take the things that have caused us trauma, or things that have hurt us, or things that have scared us, and craft those things in such a way, meld those things together in such a way to where we can use it to actually change conditions in our communities, in our state, in our country, even in the world, and just know that we have the power to do it. We don't have to definitely don't have to rely on politicians to change our conditions. The change comes from us. We're the heroes we're waiting on, so tap into it. Yep.
It was a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Always.